icónica urbana no necesariamente concuerda con las opiniones aquí expresadas.
BiblioChisme.
BiblioChisme?
Yes, BiblioChisme. What are you reading?
I'm reading a book about this.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to BiblioChisme. I am Angela.
And I am Mao. Hello, Angela. Good night. Greetings.
Greetings to you. How are you doing today?
I'm so happy that it seems like we've said hello.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Some technical difficulties happen sometimes.
Yes.
So, who do you listen to for book recommendations aside from people you know?
Interesting.
Yeah. Silent, because there's so many answers to this question. I think you're making a list.
No, I'm thinking because you said besides people you know, because that would be my first reference. Besides that, I tend to follow a lot of accounts on Twitter and Facebook that are literature related. And sometimes I make decisions on what they're saying about a book or an author. Sometimes I get to know books or authors over that conversation. And for example, I'm gonna talk tonight about a book by an Argentinian author, and I didn't know anything about her until she won a prize. And she won this prize a few years ago, and her name and the name of her novel was everywhere in the literature world of Mexico, because it was a prize given to novels written by women in Mexico. So I recognize her. Not that's not the verb. I knew that she existed, and then I took a decision that I wanted to read that book, and that's most of the. I would say that it's recommendations by literature magazines and literature Twitter accounts. I don't read very much these huge publications like the New York Times, or there's another one like the review of books. It takes too much time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's really interesting to have those sources, resources, but it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, like, I really admire and I respect people who do book reviews, both journalists for, prominent publications that get paid well to do it, and then people on social media, on Goodreads, the bookstagrammers, the book talkers. Like, I have so much respect for that because it is not an easy thing to do. It takes so much creativity, and some people don't get paid at all, or they get very minimal like responses to it. Librarians, people who manage blogs, like there's all these people that put out their thoughts, feelings, and opinions about books, and I think it's such a beautiful thing that happens. So I want to say that I love it and I respect the work so much, but I don't like knowing anything about books before I read them, except for very minimal themes, like this has dystopic terror or something like that about, underground movements or something, and then I'll be like, oh, that sounds interesting. I also am so susceptible to wanting books that it takes almost nothing. Like, it could be anything, anyone, and as you know, the book cover by itself will convince me that I want to read a book. So to say, who do I listen to? I listen to everyone and everything everywhere. So basically, and now my favorite thing, though, I have to say, as a librarian, is Book Riot. Book Riot has like 100,000 emails that go out every day. I don't know how the people who work for Book Riot create so much content on a constant basis, but there's tons of lists and more lists, and they're so like specific and wonderful. Graphic novels for Pride, memoirs for Pride, memoirs by people of color for Pride. Like, they have tons of things, and sometimes they're themed like that, like all the Pride stuff, and sometimes it's just really weird, like memoirs that'll make you spit up your soup with laughter. Like, it's so much fun, and there are these lists, and so I know what the major themes are, but I don't need to read reviews. So those are my favorite, because I can just pick off things that connect to things that I care about without having to read information about the actual book.
Mm.
I'm the same with movies. Like I want to, because when somebody tells me there's a twist at the end of the book, the twist is just incredible. Then I'm waiting for something, you know?
I see.
Yeah. So
I with movies, I love the trailers, previews, and the expectation, like this film is going to happen, and I get very excited. But I don't read anything about the film until I see it. The most things I read about a film is how much it lasts, so that I can make a decision if I'm making popcorn or not.
Yes.
Or if I will need a coffee, or that. That's as much as I go. Even though if it's a film of a filmmaker that I know, and that I know their work, and I've seen plenty of their films, if I haven't seen that film, it's most likely that I haven't read anything about it. So, but with books, I'm different. But most likely, I would read about the author, not about the book, but about the author. And when I hear about a new book by someone, I would do some research on the author, and if it's interesting to me, if it appeals, I would listen. You know what? One of the places that I get recommendations for books, and that I know that they exist, it's inside the books themselves.
Yeah.
When I'm reading a book and something happens in the novel that they make a reference about an author or a book, I normally pay more attention to that. It's like part of the equation, that if the character of this book is reading this other book, maybe there's some sort of mystery developed there.
I find that so obnoxious sometimes. Like, it's like a in-game, you know? Like, I think it's cool, but I also feel like it's like, oh, let me talk about books that are fascinating to me in my book. It's too much. But sometimes I think it's really funny. Like, I love it when writers exist in their own work. For example, Stephen King is notorious for not only like being in films that he wrote, but he also like talks about himself in books. Like he brings himself into that fictional world. I think that's hilarious and I love it. But I like sometimes when writers name other books, like the characters reading this particular book, sometimes it tells you a lot, right? It explains like what the character's going through, what kind of character it is. But sometimes I find it like, okay, we know you're a writer and we know you love books and we know you love reading. Like, you don't have to prove that in the narrative, you know?
Yeah, but there are certain characters that they need to have a book background. For example, I would say Julio Cortázar in Rayuela. The amount of references, it's huge, but it makes sense.
Yeah. And I would also say, like, as we're talking like novels and fiction right now, but also, you know, nonfiction books are a great example of this. Like when you read like historical books or biographies, they'll reference a ton of other resources that then I go and look up and add to my list. So that is a good point you're making.
Yeah. Yay.
Well, that's fabulous. We should go on a break so we can find out what book you're talking about.
Chan, chan, chan.
You're listening to BiblioChisme. We are back, everybody. Thank you for waiting to hear our books. But before we do that, we have to say hello to.
We have to say hello to David Cruz. He says, greetings for Angela and Mao.
Hi, David.
We also want to say hello to our dearest listeners in the future, Male and Aubrey.
Yay! Thank you, future listeners and current listeners and listeners of the past.
Also, we would like to say hello to Sophia and to Andrea, who were listening the last show of BiblioChisme, and they were saying that they were all for the giggling.
Yes, giggling. They like our giggles.
Yes.
And Lulu, who said that she said that we had great podcast voices before she even heard the podcast. So thank you to all of you for listening. And they told us what they were reading, but it's gone for now. We might mention it next time, but thank you to all our listeners.
Yes, we all always want to know what you're reading because it's really interesting.
Always. And please don't ever get into a conversation with us and say, oh yeah, I have this book, and then continue the conversation without telling us which book it is. Because we need to know which one, always.
Is that clear, Aubrey?
No, don't put it on her. Everybody does it sometimes, but...
I know, but like she's done it like 3 times in a row. Anyways,
we love Aubrey. We love Aubrey. Don't chantaje her.
Oh, it's part of the Mexican chisme culture. Yeah. I'm sorry. Anyways, last week I was going to talk about a book by a Gemini author, and it was a queer book. But as we didn't have a show, there's no space for me to talk about Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. But I want to talk about a book by Camila Sosa Villada, an Argentinian author, and this novel, it's called Las Malas. This novel, it's a really, really interesting book. And as I was telling before, I didn't know anything about her until she won the prize. for this book. It's a very important prize for women authors, and she won. And there was a lot of happiness in the literature world and a lot of bitterness because Camila Sosa Villada is a trans author. So there were certain voices, mostly men, saying that she could not win a prize for women because she was not a woman. But this conversation that goes on around trans people all the time. She calls herself a transvestite. She uses the Argentinian way of expressing the gender, and she calls herself a transvestite, and she calls her friends transvestites. And in this novel, what happens? She uses a lot of the term because she talks about this girl, this boy that lives in a small town in the middle of nowhere, but then he goes to a bigger city, not Buenos Aires, but a bigger city in Argentina to study high school and then college and then university. And as he's studying and he's free of living in the household, in the parents' household, he goes to a park and he starts seeing how the transvestites work there and how they relate to each other. And then, very scared and very young and underage, he puts on a dress, high heels, a top, makeup, and he goes there to one night, and she becomes part of the gang Las Malas. I mean, it's not a gang that it's called Las Malas, but she talks about this group of women that gather at the park to prostitute themselves. And she talks a lot about the relationship they have between each other, with lovers, with men, with police, with corruption, with drugs, with AIDS, with ITS, different things.
When is this set? What years?
This is set in the early 90s. And the interesting thing about this is that it's a novel, but it could be seen as a memoir, as it's part of her own life.
Well, like so many novels, right?
No, but like she talks about Camila in the main character, it's Camila. Huh?
Oh, I see.
And what I wanted to share is that there's something really beautiful about this novel. She used to have a blog back in the early 2000s, and one day she decided to disappear that blog. In that blog, she talked a lot about what happened in that park in Córdoba, Argentina. And she deleted everything. And then she became an actress. She became a little bit more famous. And then one day, some guy writes to her and he says, your blog was so important to me because that made me recognize my own sexual diversity. So I wanted to thank you, and I heard in an interview that you erased everything that you had in that blog, but I have a copy of everything because I copied and pasted on a Word document. And so this guy sends it back to Camila. She reads it again, and then she decides to work on this novel because she recognized the voice of a generation. Most people that she talks in the book have died um, because in Argentina, as in Latin America, trans people are life expectancy of trans people is very short because they live in a very violent context. And she writes this amazing novel of amazing characters. And what makes it a novel is that she uses a little bit of fiction, like magic happens and someone gets feathers on her skin and becomes a bird. Someone becomes like a different type of character. Things happen, but it's a very beautiful and an amazing novel. And I just bought a book by her that it's called Soy una tonta por quererte, which I love the title.
I'm dumb for loving you.
Yes.
Also, Las Malas translates to like the bad ones. Because this book isn't available in English, right?
I don't know.
I don't see it. I did buy it for the library in Spanish, but I haven't seen it in English.
It's back from 2019, so it might be a very, very short time for being translated into English. And also, I don't know, maybe for publishing houses in the US could be a very risky book to publish because it goes to very how do you say that? Politically incorrect things. Like she has a strong voice, and she says things that are like, wow.
But I mean, there's a lot of books like that in the US. I mean, in the sense that they're risky, they're also popular. Like things that cause controversy sell more. So I don't know that would be the case, but I think you're right. It's maybe too recent. I have heard a lot of buzz around this book in Spanish. It's come up a lot, so it makes me happy that it's being moved. I want to specify that when you said that people were criticizing it because, quote unquote, they think she's not a woman, that's not what we're saying here, of course. But I mean, I am so happy that she won this prize, and it's on my list because I really want to read it as well. So I'm glad you talked about it today.
It is an amazing book. It's of course, as I love it, it's a very sad book.
Of course. I mean, the very few things you've said about it feel like they're going to break our hearts, of course.
Yes.
But we need to know those stories that break our hearts too.
Yep. I think that it's a very important book, and as it's still June and it's still Pride Month, and we are fighting for a lot of things lately, I think that it's a very important and very relevant voice.
Yeah, it is. And I just want to specify that you can talk about Geminis all year.
I know.
But yes. Thank you for reading this book today.
We can talk about Walt Whitman any other time.
Exactly. This book is really important, and hopefully we'll have a translation soon that we can talk about for those people who can't read Spanish.
I follow her on Twitter. I love her. She's really, really fun. But And she's been doing a lot of traveling lately, promoting her work, especially presenting the last book, Soy una tonta por quererte. She's been all around South America, so hopefully she'll be noticeable soon.
Yeah. Mom.
For English publishing.
Exactly. Well, how about we go on a break and then we'll come back and talk about another book.
Let's go. You're listening to BiblioChisme.
We're back again.
Hey. How about you?
I have a book that was really fun to read. I read it like in a day. And it's really funny because I recently went to Denver and I bought it at a bookstore, forgetting that I already had it on audiobook. So so our dear Aubrey is going to get a gift of the book. But I bought the first and the second one because it's a series just based on the description. So how do you feel about fairy tales?
I like fairy tales.
Right? I feel like they speak to a certain joy of childhood to me. Like I love the idea of fairy tales. They feed like my heart and curiosity. The little girl me is like, yay, fairy tales. But also, fairy tales are really effed up, right? Because the majority of the fairy tales that we listen to are very sexist. So
yes, and actually fairy tales are not necessarily happy things.
No, and I'm talking about like what is your idea of a fairy tale, right? So like we could have the fairy tales that are very Disneyfied or the actual fairy tales that were really violent and horrible. And I'm not sure like what the point was other than to teach weird lessons or whatever. But I picked up this book because I love the idea of fairy tales like retold and to fit a new generation. So the book is called A Spindle Splintered. And actually, I had wanted to read the second book that's called Mirror Mended first, but then I saw that there was the first one, which I already had. So a spindle makes you think of Sleeping Beauty, right?
Yes.
But the main character in this book is today, like she lives in the world today, and there's some sort of industrial accident in her town, and there's pollution that causes her to have a rare, weird disease that means she's going to fall asleep and die. I mean, it's not literal, like she's just going to die, right? But she interprets it as she is like Sleeping Beauty. But she also does like a degree in like fairy taleology, right? And she also continuously like critiques the fairy tale for its sexism. So I love that because it's like I love this thing and I can also talk about how it's sending a bad message. And so she's talking about how ever since she was a kid, she loved the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale because she identified with Sleeping Beauty because she felt so powerless against her disease. And then all of a sudden, on her 21st birthday, her friend throws her a party, a themed party of Sleeping Beauty, and there's a spindle and everything, and she pricks her finger and things happen. Of course, magical things happen here. It's a very light story. Like it's not, I think some reinterpretations of fairy tales try to be way grown up and try to be really intense. This isn't that intense. Like it's still something kind of light and sweet and kind, but I love that it's calling out the things that are sexist. It's also it's also queer, and it's just fun. It was just fun to read. I read it like right away, and it's the first one. So I will read the second one and let you know what I think. But it was just it was a fun read, and it was great because I've been reading so many books that are thrillers and are very intense, and there's like mysteries and murders and or like history and all these things. And it was just nice to read something that, even though there's also like the possibility of someone dying in this book, it's not so devastating. So I made a puzzle while I listened to the book.
I think I also think that fairy tales and short stories, fables, tell us things on a different way.
Yeah.
That work on a subconscious level. We can listen to the story, we can listen to what's happening, and the amazing beauty of it, the imagination and everything. But there's something else in that story. Like they're teaching us or telling us to take care of weird men in the forest,
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
behave like beware of weird men in the forest, of
Yeah.
perverts. Beware of. I should shut up because I was going to go all political. Anyways, but yeah, they give us information about evil people that pretend, like it's a way of telling kids, like, don't trust everyone.
Yeah.
Because as a
Absolutely.
little kid, you have a big heart and you trust everyone, and you could be following someone who has a different intention.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think they do have these like things, but then there's these other messages that are just like, oh, men can save you from everything, and it's okay to kiss a woman when she's not conscious. And
Oh yes.
there's those things too. But and like a writer that I really like commented on this book that it's a bit cheesy in the beginning. It can be a little bit like it does have that, but it's like for me this kind of joyful, like I fall into the cheesiness. There's cheesiness that is just joyful, and that's how I felt with this book. Like I like that. There's times when I just want to not be so cynical, and this kind of book takes me out of that. So, yeah.
Also, what I wanted to say before going on this blah blah blah, is that it's very good to have a story that you just enjoy it and you don't have to go deep into it, and you don't have to analyze very deeply, and it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very fun. Also, the cover art for the book is really beautiful. I love it. So yeah, it was great. What's your favorite thing this week?
My favorite thing this week, it's been a rough weekend. My favorite thing is the amazing amount of voices, queer voices, women's voices, men's voices, people of color voices, foreigners saying fuck off to those six people and what they represent in the US.
Yeah.
Sorry. I went all political.
I mean, it's very complicated not to get political these days. So yeah, I think there's a certain level of at least hope in that. There is some hope. Um, my favorite thing, if I remove myself from that world, which is very hard, my favorite thing has been just feeling like the peace of the weather. and just going outside and reading and starting a new book with Mohit, like reading it together. That was like, so it's so much fun to read with somebody else because like you're experiencing the story together, and hopefully we'll finish it and I will talk about it on the show. So I'm not going to say what book it is.
Also, you had such an amazing weather that you were able to take out a blanket and go to a park.
Yeah, I mean, it was like what happens in the movies, right? Like where there's people like lying down on the floor together and reading books, and I'm like, oh, that never happens. And yeah, we were able to do that also, like on the porch reading. It was magnificent. I want more of that, please.
That's amazing.
All right, well, that's our show for today.
Yay!
We'll be back next week, and then we're going to take a hiatus.
Yes.
So
we'll talk about that next week.
We will talk about it next week, but we will be here next week for our year anniversary. Yay!
We already have been a year on air, right?
No, we started in July.
Are you sure?
Yeah, we said we were going to start in June, and then we kept backing, and then we started in July.
Okay, good.
Are we still recording?
I don't know. Bye.
Bye.
BiblioChisme is a podcast about creating conversation around reading, satisfying curiosities we didn't know we had, and sharing this dialogue with others, preferably with good coffee, tea, and snacks.